The abuse case against Minnesota Vikings player Adrian Peterson has raised a lot of questions, particularly about child discipline. When does spanking cross the line and become child abuse? Joining me right now in studio to talk about this very important issue is psychologist Erik Fisher and former prosecutor Tanya Miller. So Erik, to you first. How is it that we've come to this point where it seems that the definition of discipline varies from family to family, right, and now versus quite a few years ago, maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, the law steps in and says, I don't know if we necessarily agree with how you discipline your kid?
Well, I think we have to look at a whole range of issues, and which would really take time to go through the history of that. However, what I always back up to is the word discipline is often seen as equated with punishment. And the word discipline comes from the word disciple, which means to teach. And I think if we look at what we're trying to do with our children is we're trying to teach them, prepare them for the rest of their life. And while we look at that, often parenting and discipline, which was, had to do with spanking and which would become abuse, had such a wide range, and we looked at children's rights, children were often looked at more as a piece of property. Now they're looked to me, and I think we have to look at them as a gift. And this is an opportunity to raise a child to move into their generation of adulthood to understand values and morals and respect. And I just don't think we do that through physical discipline myself.
So, a parent feels like one of their biggest jobs is to teach, as you put it, or to, draw the line. But at what point is one family's choice of how they do that too much? I mean, and who and when should anyone be stepping in?
Well, that's like the million-dollar question, Fred. I mean, ultimately, parents do legally have the right to use corporal punishment on their children. The question becomes when that corporal punishment is deemed unreasonable under the law. Have you gone too far? It's sometimes police officers that show up on the scene if they've been called by a teacher because the child presents at school with marks, or someone calls 911, a neighbor. The officer has to sort of make the initial call based on the facts, but ultimately it's the prosecutor, it's the person who makes that decision about who to charge and who not to charge. And there are all kinds of factors that the prosecutor is going to look at.
So in the case of, say, Peterson, he says, listen, I'm just doing what my family did with me. And while he admits there were markings on his child, as a result of, this discipline, in his view, his defense is, I don't see this as being any different from what I endured as a kid. And there are others who come to his defense who say, I wouldn't be who I am today if not for that kind of discipline imposed. So is it an issue of evolution? It may have been acceptable years ago. It is not today. Or is it an issue of, we're in a day and age of photographs and video that's a lot more compelling than the spoken word?
I think there's sort of two ways to look at it. There's sort of cultural evolution. There's sort of whether or not that sort of defense that Peterson is putting forward culturally makes sense. As a matter of law, it doesn't. You cannot simply say, well, this is the way my mom raised me, therefore that's the way I'm raising my son. As a matter of law, it can't be child abuse. That's not the standard. The standard is whether or not what you did to that child can be considered excessive, excessively cruel, and to have caused that child excessive pain. And I do think that Peterson's case really crosses that line. And we can't conflate this issue of Peterson and abuse with whether or not spanking is reasonable and appropriate, and if there is some room on the parenting spectrum for spanking. That's a larger debate. The law really can't join in on that debate. We're a little bit more constrained in terms of what we can say is abuse and is not abuse.
And Erik, as we talk about evolution, there's been an evolution in everything. I mean, we were kids who sat in the back seat of our cars without seat belts, etc. Studies, said now if you have some kind of, restraint, car restraints, your life is better protected. And so the same can be applied to this psychology or this method of discipline. There are studies that say there is mental and physical suffering that comes from corporal punishment. So, how does anyone make a reason or, digest this, especially if they want to, recall family history as opposed to referring to new studies?
Well, I think not only do we have to look at the scars of physical discipline, but often the scars of emotional abuse and can be more severe that we have to pay attention to. However, 2,000 years ago, our world evolved. Because when we look at the phrase, spare the rod and spoil the child, is a derivation of a phrase from Proverbs that was put together by King Solomon. King Solomon was an extremely punitive father, and they felt that that was some of his beliefs he imparted in the book of Proverbs that became part of the Old Testament. His son Rehoboam was extremely abusive to his subjects and actually had to escape assassination a few times because he basically took what his dad did to him and passed it on down. When the New Testament was written, Jesus never talked about spanking your children. He love thyself as, love thy neighbor as thyself, do unto others as you have them do unto you. When I talk about parenting in my parenting book, I revert back to equity-based models of parenting, that we want to teach our kids a love-based respect, not a fear-based respect. And time again, when I have kids and parents and families...
Because you heard from the one child in that piece that Gary Tuckman brought, and the little girl said, well, I try really hard not to do anything so as to get, a whooping or a spanking, and the mom even said, these children are very intelligent, and so they know right from wrong.
But you can do that with a timeout or response cost or writing essays, other ways that teach them not to use power over people to get control. I believe in teaching people to have power with people, to understand that I want to learn to respect others for who they are, not respect them because they can hurt me. And that's what I feel concerned that kids learn through this. And if parents spent more time parenting and really being present with their kids and forming solid attachments, we wouldn't have these issues. I see the difference between parents don't spend as much quality time with their kids, and that could be the confounding variable, not that they don't spank their kids. And I think we have to look at a qualitative issue.
So still a persistent conflict is going to be balancing philosophical differences with what the law expects or what the law is able to enforce?
Right. I mean, listen, my own experience, my mother raised me. She did not spank me. She didn't believe in spanking. She grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s with a mother who did believe in it and who enforced her rule by using that kind of punishment. My mother came out okay, but I came out okay too. And ultimately, I think that the time that my grandmother was parenting in versus the time that my mother was parenting in versus the time that I'm now parenting in has changed. And I do think that there is this notion of evolution and this notion that we can change and we can do things differently. The law might not be able to enforce that, but I think that culturally and as a society, discussions like this, people being open to the possibility that there is another way to do it could very well lead to that evolution.
All right, Tanya Miller, Erik Fisher, good to see both of you. Thank you so much. It is a conversation that is taking place in kitchens and living rooms everywhere right now, particularly as a result of all that's happened in the NFL. Appreciate it.
Thank you.